Beneath the canopy of the ancient whitethorne forest, 5 friends sought the perfect spot to camp. The untouched wilderness promised a weekend of laughter, stories, and the magic of nature. The spot they chose was idyllic, a clearing bordered by a mysterious circle of dark weathered stones. Each stone stood tall, like silent sentinels guarding an ancient secret. As the sun began its descent, casting an amber hue, they set up their tents near the circle, awed by its mystique. Some believed it to be a druidic circle, others mused it could be an old village gathering place. As night enveloped them, the campfire's dance became the centerpiece of their world. Soon, stories began, each more chilling than the last. It was Abby, with a fondness for local legends, who shared the tale of the Whitethorn Circle. Centuries ago, she whispered, her eyes reflecting the flames, this circle was a sacred space for rituals. It was believed that on certain nights, spirits would dance within it, seeking a way back to the mortal world. The friends chuckled, attributing her eerie tale to the atmosphere and wine. As midnight approached, they retreated to their tents, the crackling fire and distant owl hoots lulling them to sleep. But sleep would not come easy. Just past midnight, Mark, the skeptic of the group, was roused by a low, monotonous chant. He listened, dismissing it as a dream. But then, it grew louder, clearer, emanating from the stone circle. Peeking out of his tent, his blood froze. Shadowy figures, almost ethereal, moved within the circle, their forms blurred, but their chants hauntingly clear. One by one, the other campers woke, drawn by the eerie song. Hidden behind their tents, they watched in horror as the figures danced, their movements synchronized, their voices merging into a hypnotic melody. Time seemed to blur, and it felt like an eternity before the first rays of dawn began to pierce the horizon. With daylight, the figures vanished, leaving the campers in stunned silence. The morning sun revealed another horror. Each stone now bore a fresh carving, grotesque depictions of tormented faces and scenes of unspeakable horror. The most terrifying part, each camper recognized a scene from their darkest fears. Lisa, always terrified of drowning, saw herself submerged in stormy waters, her hands reaching out for an unreachable surface. For Jake, who had an inexplicable fear of crows, a scene showed him surrounded by a murder of crows, their beaks and talons tearing into him. Mark's stone depicted him trapped in a coffin, his face distorted with claustrophobic terror. Abby, with her fear of fire, was illustrated engulfed in flames, her scream forever etched in stone. And Ben, who always feared isolation, was shown standing alone in an endless void, his face the epitome of despair. The horror of the carvings paled in comparison to the realization that the circle had somehow tapped into their deepest fears. The campers packed up hurriedly, the weight of the night's events heavy on their shoulders. But as they left, Abby, her face pale, whispered, "The circle knows. It feeds off our fears." Months passed, but the events of that night haunted their dreams. Each struggled with the weight of the circle's curse. Sleep was elusive, for every time they closed their eyes, the carvings came to life, making them relive their darkest fears. One by one, their fears began to manifest in reality. Lisa found herself increasingly drawn to water, waking up by lakes or rivers, with no memory of how she got there. Jake would be startled by crows wherever he went, their caws sounding eerily like laughter. Mark began finding himself in confined spaces, panic attacks, making reality a nightmare. Abby was plagued by incidents of fire, her house, her workplace, even her car catching fire mysteriously. And Ben, he began distancing himself, the weight of isolation crushing him. The curse of the Whitethorn Circle was unrelenting. One fateful evening, they decided to return, hoping to break its grip. The forest, once inviting, now seemed foreboding. As they approached the circle, they found it just as they left it, save for the carvings which seemed even more pronounced. Hesitatingly, they entered the circle, standing opposite their respective stones. The chant from that night began playing in their heads, growing louder with each passing second. They realized, with mounting horror, that they were now the shadowy figures, their souls forever trapped in the cursed dance. To this day, campers speak of the Whitethorn Circle, and the mysterious chants that can be heard on moonless nights. Those who venture close enough in the morning find new carvings, each telling a tale of horror. But none are as vivid or as terrifying as the ones depicting the 5 friends, forever bound to the circle, their fears etched in stone. The deep woods of Ravenscroft had long been a favorite spot for adventurous campers. It was a vast stretch of wilderness, full of dense trees, cascading waterfalls, and a silence that was both peaceful and unsettling. 5 friends, Jason, Mia, Keith, Lila, and Owen, had chosen a remote spot for their annual camping trip. The tranquility was what they sought after a hectic year. They set up their camp with precision, tents in a semicircle, a fireplace at the center, and their personal belongings neatly organized within their respective tents. On the second day, while out exploring, Keith spotted another campsite. It was quite a distance away, on a slightly elevated patch. It looked oddly familiar, but no one could quite place why. They assumed it was just another group enjoying the serenity Ravenscroft had to offer. But as the days went by, an eerie pattern emerged. Every morning, as the group went about their activities, they'd find the distant campsite inching ever closer, although they never saw its occupants. It wasn't long before paranoia set in. "I swear, it looks just like our setup," Lila remarked on the 4th day, her voice a mix of wonder and unease. The others had to admit she was right. The layout, the tent colors, even the campfire setup was eerily similar. By the 5th day, the unknown campsite was close enough that they could make out details. The gear and tents were not just similar, they were exact replicas of their own. The realization sent shivers down their spines. What made it even more unsettling was the aged look. Everything had the tents appeared withered, the campfire ashes old and cold. "We should approach them," Mia said, trying to mask her anxiety. "Maybe it's just a weird coincidence." That evening, summoning their courage, the group decided to visit the neighboring camp. As they neared it, an oppressive silence enveloped them. The air grew cold, and a sense of foreboding filled their hearts. The camp was deserted, or so it seemed. The tents, though exact replicas of their own, bore signs of years of exposure to the elements. The zippers were rusted, the fabric thin and torn in places. Hesitatingly, Jason unzipped the first tent. Inside, they found personal belongings eerily similar to their own, but aged and deteriorated. A journal, a flashlight, clothes, and more. Keith picked up the journal, its pages yellowed with time. The handwriting inside was disturbingly familiar. As he read the entries aloud, the group listened in growing horror. Day 2. Saw another campsite today. Looks a lot like ours. Wonder who they are. Day 4. The other camp is getting closer. It's eerie. Lila thinks it looks just like our setup. Day 5. We're going to approach them tonight. Need to know why our camps are so similar. The dates on the entries matched their own camping trip days, and the handwriting was unmistakably Keith's. Dropping the journal, the group raced back to their campsite, panic driving their steps. As they huddled together, they tried to make sense of the impossible situation. "We need to leave," Owen finally said, his voice trembling. "First thing at dawn. Pack up and get out of here." But dawn brought a fresh horror. When Mia stepped out of her tent, she screamed, drawing the others out. Their original campsite was there, but right beside it, separated by just a few feet, was the aged replica. The full weight of their situation descended upon them. The forest, the campsite, the chilling challenges. It was as if Ravenscroft was caught in a sinister loop, and they were trapped in its cycle. "We have to break the loop," Jason declared. "We can't end up like them." They decided to leave immediately. But the forest had other plans. No matter which direction they took, they ended up back at the dual campsites. Despair set in as the woods seemed to close in on them. In a desperate move, they decided to burn the aged campsite, hoping to end the eerie repetition. But as the flames consumed the weathered tents and old belongings, a chilling wind blew, extinguishing their own campfire. The darkness around them seemed to grow denser. When the flames at the other camp finally died down, the group was met with a terrifying sight. Their own campsite, their tents, their belongings had aged. Everything appeared old, weathered, just like the other camp had. They had become the echo they feared. To this day, hikers and campers in Ravenscroft sometimes speak of seeing two campsites, eerily similar, one aged and the other fresh. And every so often, a new group will venture too deep into the forest, only to find a campsite that mirrors their own, inching closer with each passing day, a chilling reminder of the cycle that awaits them. Deep within the Ellsworth forest lay a pristine lake, untouched by civilization. The lake, with its crystal-clear waters and the surrounding lush green canopy, was a sight to behold. It was a perfect getaway for those who wanted to break from the hustle and bustle of city life. 4 friends, Lena, Dominic, Rachel, and Grayson, had heard tales of this secluded paradise. They were seasoned campers and had traversed many trails, but the stories about the Ellsworth Lake had an allure they couldn't resist. On a sunny afternoon, they finally reached the lake. The shimmering water looked inviting, and the soft chirping of birds added to the tranquility. They set up camp at a clearing overlooking the lake. As night fell, the forest echoed with the usual sounds, the chirping of crickets, and the occasional rustling of leaves. But as the moonlight reflected off the water's surface, a soft, enchanting melody wafted through the air. The sound was almost hypnotic, beautiful voices singing an ancient, haunting tune. Drawn to the water, the campers approached the lake's edge. To their astonishment, they saw fleeting images of ethereal beings moving beneath the water, figures with flowing hair and eyes that sparkled like the night sky. "These must be the water nymphs the legends spoke of," whispered Rachel, her voice a mixture of awe and fear. Dominic, ever the skeptic, laughed it off. "Just an illusion," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The night passed, and though they were disturbed by the mysterious singing, the allure of the lake kept them rooted. But the next night, the voices grew louder, more beckoning. Lena, captivated by the beauty of the song, felt an irresistible urge to approach the water. She walked trance-like, her feet barely touching the ground, and as she reached the edge, she saw the face of a beautiful nymph looking up at her. Their eyes locked, and Lena, without a second thought, stepped into the water. Dominic, Grayson, and Rachel watched in horror as Lena was embraced by the nymph and pulled into the depths of the lake. They ran to the edge, but no trace of Lena remained, just the ripples on the water's surface. The singing stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. The 3 friends, shaken by the incident, decided to leave at first light. But as dawn approached, the haunting melody returned, only this time, Lena's voice was a part of the chorus. Grayson, overwhelmed by grief and the enchanting song, was the next to be drawn to the water. He saw Lena beneath the surface, her eyes pleading, and in a heartbeat, he joined her, disappearing into the lake's depths. Rachel and Dominic were now frantic. They decided to leave immediately, but the forest seemed to have transformed overnight. The once familiar path was now unrecognizable, and every step they took led them back to the lake. The singing continued, and by the 3rd night, Rachel, unable to resist the call, walked into the lake, leaving Dominic alone, terrified and desperate to escape. Days turned into nights, and the singing grew louder. Dominic, now on the brink of madness, decided to face the beings in the lake. As he approached the water, he saw the faces of Lena, Grayson, and Rachel looking up at him. But their eyes were no longer pleading, they were beckoning. Torn between the desire to join his friends and the fear of the unknown, Dominic made a choice. He would challenge the beings of the lake. With a deep breath, he dived into the water, but instead of being embraced, he felt himself being pushed to the surface. Dominic emerged to find himself at a different part of the lake, near an old shrine. An elderly woman stood there, her eyes filled with sadness. "You've been given a second chance," she whispered. The lake's nymphs once protected this forest, but over time they grew lonely and began luring people into the water. Those who enter can never leave. Dominic, tears streaming down his face, asked, "Why was I spared?" "Because," the old woman replied, "the forest needs a guardian. The nymphs need to be reminded of their purpose. They need someone who can resist their song." Dominic understood. He would stay, guarding the lake, ensuring no one else fell prey to its enchanting lure. Years passed, and the legend of Ellsworth Lake grew. Stories of its beauty were accompanied by warnings of its dangers. But every now and then, a brave soul would venture close, and the haunting melody would claim another victim, their voice forever joining the chorus of the lake's eternal song. As the clock ticks towards dawn, this is Midnight Callers signing off, reminding you, when darkness falls, the stories rise. Sleep tight, if you dare.